Just stop wasting your time selling secondhand clothes. Nobody wants that, only poor people like you.
The words landed like a slap in front of the whole taxi rank, and for a second, Thandai forgot how to breathe. Lorado had stepped out of a black Mercedes in a cream suit that cost more than Thandai's entire stock, sunglasses pushed up into her perfectly styled bob, lips curled into the kind of smile that was really just contempt wearing lipstick. The crowd around the stall turned to look, some hiding their laughter behind their hands, others not bothering to hide it at all. Thandai kept folding a denim jacket, her fingers steady even though her chest was not. She needed this stall. Not for herself, but for her younger sister Nomvula, who was lying in a hospital bed 2 kilometers away with a kidney that was failing faster than the doctors had hoped. Every jacket sold, every dress that found a new owner, was another step closer to the dialysis bill that grew taller every single week. Lorado did not know that. Or maybe she did and simply did not care anymore, which was somehow worse. To understand how 2 girls who once shared a single blanket on cold Soweto nights ended up here, you have to go back 15 years, when Thandai and Lorado were just 2 barefoot children chasing each other between tin shacks, trading dreams instead of toys. They had nothing, but they had each other, and back then that felt like enough. Thandai was the quiet one who noticed beauty in broken things, the one who could turn a torn shirt into something a girl would be proud to wear. Lorado was the loud one, the one who laughed the hardest and dreamed the biggest, always saying she would marry a rich man and never look back at the dust they grew up in. She kept her word. At 22, Lorado married Bongani, a property developer twice her age with more money than patience. And almost overnight the girl who used to share porridge with Thandai started complaining about the smell of the township on visits home. The transformation did not happen in one day. It crept in slowly, the way rust eats metal, a little shame here, a little distance there, until one day she stopped visiting altogether. Today was the first time in over a year that Lorado had bothered to drive past her old friend, and she had chosen to use that moment to humiliate her in front of strangers. "Ish, you are still here, selling other people's clothes like it's some kind of career," Lorado said, walking closer, her heels clicking against the pavement like a countdown. The crowd's laughter grew louder, a man in the back even pointed, and somewhere a child asked his mother why the rich lady was so angry at the lady with the nice clothes. Thandai finally looked up, and what was in her eyes was not anger, it was something heavier, something closer to grief for a friendship that clearly no longer existed. She did not shout back, she did not cry, she simply picked up the next item from her basket and kept folding, her jaw tight, her hands trembling just slightly enough that only someone who truly knew her would notice. Pride and pain sat side by side on her face, and somehow she managed to keep working through both. Lorado, satisfied that she had made her point, tossed her hair, told the crowd to enjoy the show, and walked back to her car without buying so much as a single sock, leaving behind nothing but laughter and the smell of expensive perfume. The crowd slowly drifted away once the entertainment ended, the way crowds always do, hungry for the next distraction. Thandai was left standing among neatly folded jeans and jackets, blinking fast, refusing to let a single tear fall in a place this public. That was when she noticed a man who had not laughed, had not pointed, had not moved at all during the entire scene. He was tall, dressed simply in a navy shirt and dark trousers, nothing flashy, nothing that screamed money the way Lorado's outfit had, yet there was a calm authority about him that made people instinctively step aside as he approached. Without a word, he began going through her stock, item by item, checking stitching, checking fabric, nodding slightly to himself like a man inspecting something far more valuable than second-hand clothes. Then he simply said, "I will take all of it," and started counting out cash before Thandai could even process what was happening. "All of it," she repeated, certain she had misheard him, her voice catching somewhere between disbelief and the urge to ask if this was some kind of joke at her expense too. He did not explain himself, did not smile for show the way Lorado had smiled for cruelty. He simply placed the money in her hand, folded her fingers gently over it, and slid a plain white card into her palm. No name printed on it, no business title, nothing but a single phone number in clean black ink. By the time Thandai looked up to ask who he was already walking away, disappearing into the crowd of the taxi rank as easily as he had appeared. She stood there holding more cash than she had earned in the past month, and a card that gave her absolutely no answers, only questions. Who was this man? Why had he bought everything without even haggling the way every other customer did? And why did something about the calm way he looked at her make her feel, for the first time that day, like she was not invisible? By the next morning, the video of Lorado humiliating Thandai with the taxi rank had already made its rounds through 3 separate WhatsApp groups, a church choir chat, and somehow even reached the ears of the fruit vendor 2 streets over who had never met either woman in his life. Gossip in a township travels faster than fire in dry grass, and by the time Thandai arrived to open her stall, half the market already had an opinion about her, none of them flattering. "Eesh, isn't that the one the rich lady embarrassed yesterday?" A woman whispered to her friend, not whispering quite loud enough, and Thandai felt her ears burn even though she kept her eyes fixed on her boxes of stock. She had not slept much, partly from worry about Nombula's hospital bill, and partly because her fingers kept finding their way to the plain white card tucked inside her jacket pocket, turning it over again and again like a question she was too afraid to ask out loud. Curiosity, in the end, beat caution. During her lunch break, she walked away from the noise of the market, found a quiet spot behind a shipping container that smelled faintly of oranges, and dialed the number with her heart thudding against her ribs like it had somewhere urgent to be. He picked up on the second ring, his voice calm in a way that instantly made her feel foolish for being nervous. "I was wondering when you would call," he said, and there was something almost amused in it, the way a person sounds when they already know how a story is going to end. It turned out the quiet man in the navy shirt was Saifo Malangu, a name that meant absolutely nothing to Thandai until she searched it later that night on a borrowed phone and found article after article calling him one of the most influential and most private investors in South African textiles and fashion. He owned stakes in factories from Durban to Cape Town, yet he drove an unremarkable car, wore unremarkable clothes, and apparently enjoyed spending his Saturday mornings wandering markets nobody important was supposed to care about. He told her plainly that he had not bought her stock out of pity. He had bought it because her eye for fabric, her instinct for which second-hand piece could become someone's favorite outfit again, was rarer than people realized, and rare things were worth investing in. "I want to fund a proper storefront for you," he said. "Not as charity, as a partnership. You bring the talent, I bring the capital, and we split what we build." Thandai laughed before she could stop herself, not because it was funny, but because it sounded too good to be real. And in her experience, things that sounded too good to be real usually came with a hook hidden somewhere inside them like a stone baked into bread. She had grown up watching men promise things to women with nothing, and she had watched what those promises usually turned into. So she pushed back, asked him outright what he really wanted from a woman who sold other people's old clothes for a living, and waited for the answer that would tell her whether to trust him or to hang up and never think about that white card again. He did not flinch at the question, which surprised her more than the offer itself. He simply explained, patiently, almost like he had expected the suspicion and respected her for it, that he had been burned before by people who smiled at his money and disappeared the moment the contracts got complicated, and that her bluntness was exactly the kind of thing that told him she was not one of those people. Still, Thandai told him she needed time to think, and he agreed without pressure, which somehow made her trust him a little more than if he had begged. While Thandai wrestled with whether to believe in a stranger's generosity, Lorado's perfect life was quietly coming apart at the seams behind closed doors. Bongani's property deals, the ones that had paid for the Mercedes and the designer suits, had started collapsing one after another, swallowed by bad loans and worse decisions, and the debt collectors who once only called during business hours had started calling at dinner time too. Lorado kept up appearances the way other people kept up a garden, watering the illusion daily so nobody outside would see the rot underneath, smiling for photos in outfits she had already worn twice before reposting them with different captions. So when word reached her, through a cousin who worked at one of Saifo's offices, that the very friend she had mocked at the taxi rank was now being courted by one of the wealthiest investors in the country, something ugly and familiar twisted in her chest. It was not just jealousy, it was fear, the kind that whispers if she rises while I am falling. What does that make me? Rather than sit with that fear, Lorado did what she always did when she felt small. She went looking for someone smaller to blame. And in this case, that meant making a few calculated phone calls of her own. She painted Thandai as unreliable, dishonest with money, the kind of woman who would take an investor's funds and disappear, planting just enough doubt in the right ears to make Saifo's business partners nervous about the deal before it had even properly begun. Lorado smiled the entire time she made those calls, the same smile she had worn at the taxi rank. except this time nobody was laughing along with her, because nobody else could see what she was doing in the shadows. Weeks later, after careful conversations and a slowly growing trust, Thandive finally agreed to the partnership, standing in a small office with sunlight cutting through the blinds, a pen in her hand. The storefront agreement spread out on the desk in front of her like the first real chance she had ever been given. Her hand was halfway to signing her name when Saifo's assistant burst through the door, out of breath, holding a phone with an email already open on the screen, an email full of accusations about Thandive's character that traced back, after a little digging, to a number registered under Lorado's husband's company. Thandive's pen froze above the paper, her heart dropping somewhere into her stomach, and for the first time since this entire journey began, she understood that her old best friend was not done trying to destroy her yet. That sabotage almost worked, but almost has never built anything lasting. Saifo, once he traced the lies back to their source, simply looked Thandive in the eye and asked one question. Did she still want this? And when she nodded, pen shaking only slightly this time, he told his partners the truth and watched most of them apologize for ever doubting her. The signature went down that same afternoon, ink drying on paper that would change both their lives, and Lorado's little scheme became nothing more than a bump neither of them mentioned again. 5 years pass in the time it takes a township to forget a scandal and remember a success story instead, and what used to be a folding table stacked with secondhand jackets had grown into Thandive House, a sustainable fashion boutique sitting proudly on a corner in Johannesburg, with a queue sometimes stretching down the block on launch days. She had not abandoned where she came from. Every collection still whispered of the same secondhand market roots, repurposed denim, reworked vintage pieces, except now magazines wrote about her instead of mocking her, and young designers asked to intern under the woman who turned discarded clothes into something people fought over. Saifo stood beside her in every part of it now, not just as the investor who once handed her a mysterious white card, but as her partner in the fullest sense, the kind of man who carried boxes without being asked and somehow still made boardrooms nervous with a single raised eyebrow. Meanwhile, the same cracks that had started in Lorado's marriage years earlier had widened into a full collapse, the kind nobody could photograph their way out of. Bongani's debts finally caught up with him in spectacular fashion: secret loans, hidden mistresses, properties that turned out to be mortgaged 3 times over. And when it all came crashing down, it took the Mercedes, the designer wardrobe, and most of Lorado's so-called friends with it. The same cousin who once leaked information about Saifo's deal now avoided her calls entirely, proving that people who only loved her appearance had no interest in loving whatever was left underneath it. So it was on an ordinary Tuesday morning that Lorado found herself walking back into the very taxi rank she had once swept through in heels and arrogance, except this time her shoes were worn thin and her shoulders carried the particular slump of someone who had run out of places to hide. She had heard, of course, that Thandive now owned a proper shop nearby. Everybody had heard, but desperation has a way of making people walk straight toward the very humiliation they fear the most, because at least it is a known thing. She spotted Thandive near the old stall location, now repainted and rebuilt as a small training stand where new sellers learned the trade Thandive herself had once been mocked for, and Lorado's stomach dropped the way it does right before you have to face the person you wronged. She braced for laughter, for fingers pointed back at her, for someone in the gathering crowd to whisper about the rich lady who fell from her throne, because that is exactly what she would have done in Thandive's position once upon a time. Instead, Thandive simply looked at her for a long moment, taking in the woman who used to share porridge with her as a child and who later tried to ruin her future out of jealousy, and something softened in her expression that Lorado did not expect and almost did not believe. "You look tired," Thandive said quietly, no mockery in it at all, just the plain observation of someone who remembered what hunger and shame felt like from the inside. Lorado's composure cracked first, tears coming before words could, and out came a stumbling apology for the taxi rank, for the lies sent to investors, for years of pretending the girl who raised her like a sister was beneath her notice. She braced again, this time for the rejection she felt she deserved. But Thandive did not offer revenge dressed up as forgiveness. She offered something far more uncomfortable for Lorado to accept: an honest job folding clothes at the very training stand built on the bones of her old humiliation, and a real chance to learn the trade properly, fold by fold, customer by customer, the slow way nobody had ever taught Lorado to value before. It was not charity wrapped in pity. It was the same kind of partnership Sifo had once offered Thandai, work for dignity instead of work for show, and Lorado accepted it with shaking hands and a humility that the old version of her would have laughed at completely. The community, the same one that had laughed along with Lorado years earlier, now watched a different scene play out. Women who once snickered behind their hands now nodding with quiet approval. The same man who had pointed and laughed now simply patting Lorado on the shoulder and telling her welcome, as if the years had rearranged everyone's role without anybody needing to say it out loud. That same afternoon, as the sun softened into the kind of gold that makes even a busy taxi rank look like something out of a painting, Sifo appeared exactly where this entire story had started, right at the spot of the original stall, holding nothing flashy, no expensive watch glinting for attention, just a small ring and an expression that made the whole market fall quiet without anyone asking them to. He did not give a long speech. He simply reminded her, in front of the very people who once laughed at her, that he had recognized her worth before the world bothered to notice it, and that he wanted to spend the rest of his life proving he still saw it every single day. Thandai said yes before he had even fully finished the sentence, laughter and tears doing that complicated dance they do during the happiest moments, and the crowd that had once watched her humiliation erupted instead into cheering, clapping, someone even starting up a song on a cheap speaker, turning the taxi rank into the loudest, happiest party Johannesburg had seen in months. Lorado stood near the edge of the crowd, clapping too, tears mixing with something that finally felt like peace instead of envy, watching the friend she had once mocked become everything she used to pretend to be. True wealth, it turns out, was never about the suit, the car, or the bag slung over someone's shoulder. It was always about the kind of heart strong enough to forgive the people who hurt it, and humble enough to build something real instead of something to show off. Thandai had both, and in the end, that was worth more than every designer label Lorado had ever owned. The end.
Enjoying the story, right? Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more interesting stories.